Good afternoon and welcome to this event in commemoration of the International Day Against Homophobia, Transphobia and Biphobia, IDAHOT, organized by the World Bank Social Sustainability and Inclusion, Latin America and Caribbean Regional Team. Thank you for joining us today to discuss challenges and opportunities for building LGBTI inclusion and resilient societies. My name is Cliff Cortez, and I'm the Sexual Orientation and Gender Identity, SOGI, Global Advisor here at the World Bank. Before we get started, a few housekeeping items, please. This event is available in English and Spanish, so at the bottom of your screen, you will see a small globe that, when you click on it, will allow you to choose the language that you want to listen to. So let's all take 2 seconds now to click on the globe and on our preferred language. You see it says interpretation. Click on it and choose the language you want to hear the whole event in. All right. Next, please use the chat function to post your questions. And in case you want to address them to a particular panelist, please make sure to include their name. We won't provide the answers in the chat, but rather we're going to be selecting questions posed in the chat as possible in the time that to pose to panelists. And we'll get to as many of those questions as we can in the time allowed. If your own question does not get answered, please, that we're going at the end of the session, put an email address for the World Bank in that chat, and you can send your question to that email, and we will endeavor to give you a response after the event. And my final housekeeping item, I want to ask forgiveness beforehand of our dear panelists, since as the moderator and timekeeper, I might take the prerogative of the moderator to cut into your remarks if I have to remind you of time. And I want to make sure, because we want to ensure that each of our panelists get enough time to engage in the conversation, equal time to engage in the conversation. So beforehand, I'm asking your forgiveness and your forbearance. So without further ado, I'm joined today by two of our World Bank directors and champions of the sexual orientation and gender identity inclusion agenda at the World Bank. Anna Wellenstein is the World Bank Regional Director for Sustainable Development in Latin America and the Caribbean. And Melinda Gill is the Global Director for the Environmental and Social Framework and the chair of the World Bank's SOGI Task Force. We also have the pleasure to have three esteemed panelists here with us today. Maria Pia Ceballos is the coordinator for employment of trans people, which is a unit of the Ministry of Women, Genders, and Diversity in Argentina. Imani Edwards is the founder of United Trans Creatives. Imani is an activist, she's a model, she's a fashion stylist, and a style director from Jamaica. And Rachel Burton is the Social Inclusion Director at the Bank Information Center, or BIC for short, a leading civil society organization that has among its focus the inclusion agenda of the multilateral development banks, including that of the World Bank. So I'm now going to hand it over to our Latin America and Caribbean Sustainable Development Regional Director, Anna Wellenstein, for some opening remarks. Anna.
Thank you so much, Cliff, and welcome to all of you. Since 2005, May 17th has been celebrated around the globe to honor sexual and gender diversity and to raise awareness about LGBTI issues and rights. Despite greater recognition of the challenges that LGBTI people face, our region has a long way to go. Exclusion against LGBTI people remains pervasive in daily life. Bullying in schools, discrimination at work, denial of health services, violence in public and private spaces are just a few examples. In the Latin American Caribbean region, only about a fourth of the countries recognize same-sex marriage. Only a third have laws prohibiting discrimination against LGBTI people, and less than a third have legislation on gender identity. This translates into significant disadvantages in education, in health, housing, and political representation and employment, among other areas. And even in countries like Uruguay and Argentina that are the recognized leaders on this topic, LGBTI people continue to face significant obstacles. 95% of trans people in Argentina do not have a formal job, and more than 70% have not completed high school. And this number reaches 90% in Uruguay. Violence and lack of protection of LGBTI people has forced them to flee their homes in several countries, including in the Northern Triangle and some countries of the Caribbean. And LGBTI people are also affected by significant health disparities. In Argentina, for example, HIV prevalence in transgender women was 34% compared to 0.4% for all Argentine women. LGBTI exclusion has unfortunately been further exacerbated by COVID-19, not only through the health impacts, but also through its economic effects and its effects on mental health. Factors such as discrimination, stigma, and prejudice in healthcare settings, along with lower socioeconomic status, can deter LGBTI people from seeking timely medical care and make them even more vulnerable to the devastating effects of this virus. Moreover, misinformation and mistrust around vaccines could further expose LGBTI people to unnecessary risks. National lockdowns and social distancing during COVID have been particularly difficult for people who have been rejected by their own families, who may suffer mental health issues as well as domestic violence. But there are some rays of light in the region, thanks to the advocacy of LGBTI organizations and the tenacity and resilience of many LGBTI people. We've seen several important milestones in the last few years. Here are just a few examples. At the institutional level, Uruguay has approved a law for inclusion of trans people in 2018. And in Bolivia, the gender identity law was adopted in 2016. To improve evidence-based policymaking, we see stepped up data collection efforts in Uruguay, in Argentina, Chile, Peru, and Mexico, among other places. At the program level, we see some fantastic initiatives, such as the programs of the Argentine government on the promotion of transgender inclusion in the labor market that Maria Pia will tell us about more during this event. And at the grassroots level, activists are ensuring that their voices are heard, not only through protests and demonstrations, but showing their resilience in their organizations to respond and cover vacuums of safety nets and service delivery. Imani Edwards will share with us how she's using creative arts for LGBTI exclusion in Jamaica and other countries of the Caribbean. Rachel Burton will also bring her global expertise on social inclusion. We also internally have been doing some progress in the World Bank. Here are a few examples: the creation of a multi-sector SOGI task force to promote the cohesive institution-wide approaches to SOGI inclusion and to seize opportunities for influencing existing and forthcoming projects and analytical work. We've had the appointment of the SOGI Global Advisor, Cliff, who's here with us today. We've included in our environmental and social frameworks non-discrimination obligations. And we have, fortunately, the continuous engagement at the senior level on these topics to push forward the inclusion of sexual minorities. Yet, we recognize there is much to be done on the ground and across our portfolio, and acknowledge the huge complexities of the task ahead of us. Well, to get this conversation started, we'll share with you a video that is part of analytical work and policy engagement that we're having on social inclusion in Uruguay. Despite being one of the most egalitarian countries in the region, some groups are still excluded and face unequal opportunities and are prone to discrimination, among them trans people. Closing the gaps on their inclusion, though, is possible. We hope that the conversation today will shed light on where we are today as a region on LGBTI exclusion, and that the voices from policymakers and activists will help push us forward on this agenda. The future that we build should be more inclusive, fair, more compassionate, and more resilient. The LGBTI community is central to achieving this goal. So we are here today to listen. Thank you very much.
La población más vulnerada de las poblaciones vulneradas.
Somos una molestia.
No nos quieren. Llegamos a casa y estamos solas. El vacío es el que nos abraza.
Pobreza, sí, hay pobreza. Hay mucha pobreza en las chicas trans.
Yo viví en la calle, yo comí de la basura. Yo también fui expulsada de mi casa.
Sufrí violencia, sufrí insultos, pasé hambre, pasé frío.
No somos una cosa equivocada, ni somos enfermos ni enfermas.
Una persona que no puede expresarse como se siente es un problema de salud y muchas veces llega a la autoeliminación.
No nos cuidan, no nos entienden, nos golpean, nos maltratan. No soy un maricón, soy una mujer trans.
La expectativa de vida de las personas trans son 35 o 40 años.
Lamentablemente la discriminación que más se sufre hoy por hoy es en la salud.
Los médicos que discriminan a las personas trans es porque les da asco tocar a una persona trans.
No acceso a la vivienda, no acceso al trabajo, no acceso a la educación.
¿Por qué? Porque tengo una opción sexual diferente, no puedo estudiar.
Pude aguantar primaria, lo que no aguanté fue secundaria. Bajaba una escalera, me tiraban con algo, me esperaban afuera, me pegaban.
Los mismos profesores te desanimaban a seguir estudiando.
Mi primer profesor me dijo, así a Boulevard, acá no.
Un día el director llamó a mi madre y le dijo, venga a buscar a esto, a su hija, hijo, no sé lo que es, venga a buscarlo. Esa fue la última vez que tuve un vínculo con la educación.
Nunca fui un varón, siempre fui niña. O sea, para mí era lo más normal, pero para ellos no.
No hay igualdad sin desarrollo y menos sin desarrollo humano.
A veces para poder trabajar, para poder insertarte, te tenés que disfrazar.
Tuve que empezar a trabajar vestida de varón.
Yo trabajé en la calle porque era eso o morirme de hambre.
No es fácil vender nuestro cuerpo.
Todas las noches sentí miedo en la calle. Me llevaban a lugares baldíos, me violaban y me dejaban tirada.
Unirse al pueblo entero sin importar la diversidad, de género, sexual, racial. Hay que unirse.
A mí la ley trans me cambió la vida.
Me hizo sentir más humana.
Como volver a nacer y ser quien yo siempre quise ser de que tengo uso de razón.
Tenemos mucho para aportar, tenemos mucho para colaborar, tenemos mucho para hacer.
Por las generaciones que vendrán, para que las cosas les sean más fáciles, todas las cosas.
Que el mundo los trate, cuando se muestren, los traten mejor de lo que me trataron a mí, con menos violencia, con menos gritos, con menos discriminación, que les dé más oportunidades, que les dé más amor.
Wow, that's a powerful testimonial. And thank you so much, Anna, for your continued support and commitment to the social inclusion agenda and SOGI inclusion in particular in Latin America and the Caribbean. Now let's turn to our esteemed panelists. I'd like to start our discussion with you, Imani. The Uruguay video shows us a crude reality in one of the most egalitarian countries in the region. It shows the resilience of trans people and their tenacious work in helping to achieve a more robust and fair legal and policy framework. So could you now tell us a little bit about the situation trans people face in Jamaica? Over to you, Imani.
First of all, I want to say thank you, Mr. Clifton, for that question. And I'm so honored to be a part of Idaho 2021. Transgender, trans woman, like a trans woman like myself, and transgender person in general, and trans men and non-binary people that are living here in Jamaica, we face significant discrimination in our daily lives. And many of us avoid seeking healthcare because of multiple social factors and influences behaviors and the capacity to remain healthy. And trans women in general, we face discrimination on a higher basis when it comes down to healthcare, when it comes down to housing, when it comes down to education, when it comes down to employment. The society here and society in general, they look at us as if we're not human, and they do not treat us as if we're human. And that's not healthy because we are human. They're supposed to see us first as human. And what I would want for Jamaica and the world and the universe in general is to actually, these leaders of these countries of the world, they need to listen to us. They need to understand us. They need to listen to us so that they're able to understand us, so that they're able to give us the help and the assistance that we need. Because they do not treat us with any form of love. They do not treat us with any form of respect. They do not treat us with any form of dignity. So this is what we're facing here in Jamaica. And myself as an activist or an advocate, I'm doing my part and working with Transwave Jamaica, which I've started working with Transwave Jamaica in 2019, and we're doing groundbreaking work from the ground up to make things more easier for the generation that is up and coming, to make things less easier for them. Transwave is an organization, Transwave JA. It promotes trans health and well-being. And I think what we need to do, because I think what we need to do in general, I think these government, as I said before, they need to listen. We also need to educate them, you know, and they also need to be sensitized. The workers need to be sensitized. And watching the video, I'm hurt, I'm in pain, I'm hungry. And I think so much more can be done. You know, we're doing so much, but so much more left needs to be done. Yeah, and that's why I have to say, I mean, I would wish for Jamaica here. I would wish for a Jamaica where people of all gender, people of all expression, you know, can be free and they're able to exercise their rights to health and to pursue happiness. That's the world that I would love to see. That's the world that I want. I'm lost for words. But again, the trans people here in Jamaica, I want the trans people to be put first in everything, because we're always put last. We still have to be fighting for our very existence. You know, so I think, as I said before, and I'm going to say it again, I think the government here can do so much more. They always go to these big seminars into these other first world countries when it comes down to our issues, and then they go to these seminars, they say what they're saying, they listen, and then they come back. And when they come back, what are they doing? It's like they're brushing it under the carpet. They're making it look as if we do not exist. And that's hurt. It's very hurtful. So I want to use the platform that I have working here at Transwave Jamaica and also working as a creative, you know, to shine light on the issues, you know, that these people that are in position are not doing for us, because we're so much more than. So that's all that I have to say just for now.
That's plenty for now. Thank you, Imani, and very, very well understood message. So thank you for that. Thank
you.
I just want to say that while you were talking, we got a request in the chat asking whether the video could be available to folks, the video that you commented on as well. And yes, in fact, you can. Everybody can. It's available through the World Bank external website and through YouTube. And there's going to be info in the chat, if there isn't already, to tell you how to access that. So without further ado, let's move from the first question to Imani, and let's talk to you, Pia. In your own country, Argentina, it's considered to have moved in recent years to having some of the most progressive programs and policies on LGBTI inclusion, not only in the region, but globally. So what were the enabling factors? Could you tell us a bit that led to these changes?
Muchísimas gracias. Quiero saludar a todas las personas presentes en esta sala, particularmente a mis hermanas travestis y trans de la región, y a quienes organizaron este hermoso conversatorio, panel, en un día tan significativo para el colectivo LGBT en el mundo, ¿no? No es casual, una fecha significativa de lucha, y en ese sentido, para referirme a lo que dijo Clifton, voy a hacer mención que en Argentina hemos pasado un proceso de avances en relación a la inclusión LGBT. Particularmente acá voy a hacer extensiva el saludo de nuestra compañera Alba Rueda, que es la subsecretaria, la primera subsecretaria trans en un gobierno como es el Estado argentino. En ese sentido, esta lucha y estos factores que se mencionaban pueden tener relación a un contexto. Ese contexto es de la lucha que tiene una trama histórica en la gesta de los movimientos de mujeres lesbianas, travestis y trans, factores que están relacionados con un contexto de organizaciones históricas, ¿no? Que luchaban por la erradicación de la discriminación y la violencia en nuestra sociedad. En el año 2019, Argentina consolida el compromiso nacional con la igualdad a través de la creación del Ministerio de Mujeres, Género y Diversidad de la Nación, con el objetivo de transformar las políticas de género y diversidad en políticas de Estado y que trasciendan los gobiernos. Esto quiere decir que la perspectiva de diversidad permite asumir que las mujeres lesbianas, gays, travestis, trans, bisexuales, intersexuales y otras identidades de género tienen un rol protagónico en la construcción de una sociedad más justa e igualitaria. Esta premisa se ve plasmada en el cuerpo legislativo de políticas públicas que tenemos hoy en Argentina y que podemos hablar justamente de una antesala. Esa antesala se debe a la gran organización histórica de lucha y de los movimientos feministas y de diversidad en Argentina. Que las personas LGBTI+, sean también defensores de la igualdad y la inclusión de la diversidad supone que las destinatarias de la política tengan voz propia. Las acciones transfeministas se basan en promover la amplificación de las voces de las destinatarias de la política y quienes viven históricamente a los márgenes de la administración pública, de la economía de la política. Los destinatarios se convierten en actores y actores principales de la política pública. En ese sentido, alguno de los avances normativos en Argentina tiene que ver con un compromiso del Estado en relación a los derechos humanos, particularmente en el 85 la suscripción al CEDAW, en el 94 la Convención Belén de Pará, en el 88 la ley de acto discriminatorio en Argentina y después hacia el 2000 la presentación de un plan nacional de discriminación. En el 2009, la Ley de Protección para prevenir y sancionar la erradicación de la violencia de las mujeres, 2006, la educación sexual integral, 2010, el matrimonio igualitario, 2012, la Ley de Identidad de Género, y ahí me detengo un minuto, porque establece el derecho a todas personas no solo al reconocimiento de su identidad de género, sino a ser tratada de acuerdo a su identidad de género en particular, y a ser identificada de ese modo en todos los instrumentos que acredita su identidad respecto al nombre de pila, a la imagen, al sexo, sin necesidad de requerir autorización judicial o administrativa. La Ley de Identidad de Género es referencia a nivel regional y es una herramienta fundamental para la protección y protección de los derechos de las niñeces y adolescencias trans en el país. Estamos creando una nueva generación y depende mucho de las políticas de Estado, pero también de una sociedad comprometida para los derechos humanos, especialmente los derechos de identidades y de expresión de género. En el 2017, la Ley de Paridad de Género. En el 2018, una ley conocida como la Ley Micaela, de capacitación obligatoria en temática de género y diversidad a las personas que se desempeñan en la función pública. La Ley 27616, que fue la reciente aprobación de la interrupción voluntaria del embarazo en Argentina, a todas las personas gestantes, reconociendo el derecho y la autonomía de mujeres, lesbianas y varones trans y personas no binarias. Y después la Ley 27611, una ley de atención del cuidado integral de la salud durante el embarazo. Es importante acá mencionar el cupo laboral 721, ¿no? El decreto 721 que salió en septiembre del año pasado, que ya profundizaré en la siguiente intervención un poquito más a qué se refiere. Todo este marco normativo no fue producto simplemente de un Estado allí, sino fue producto de una lucha organizada del movimiento de mujeres y de la disidencia sexual en las calles que toma agenda política pública, y por eso el Ministerio actual tiene un desafío enorme a que transversalizar estas políticas de género y diversidad a todas las estructuras del Estado Nacional, pero también que sea ejemplar. Políticas como la inclusión y el acceso de personas travestis y trans a los espacios laborales no sea solo un desafío del Ejecutivo Nacional, sino que sea ejemplar para los sectores privados, para el Poder Ejecutivo, para el Poder Legislativo, es decir, que comprometa a otros sectores. Por eso les activistas y militantes en Argentina seguimos promoviendo que es importante una ley de cupo e inclusión para las personas travestis y trans no binarias. Bueno, hasta acá llego con esta primera intervención, después volveré a retomar y avanzaré un poquito más en la explicación de lo que es el cupo laboral travesti trans. Lo que es importante decir allí tiene que ver justamente con lo que mencionaba hace rato una de las compañeras panelistas, ¿no? El Estado argentino en el decreto 721 reconoce la violencia y la discriminación de manera sistemática que sufrieron los cuerpos travestis y trans por parte del Estado, como fue y como son los edictos policiales o las violencias institucionales que han recibido las corporalidades travestis y trans. Revertir esa situación depende de políticas públicas. Estamos hablando de situaciones de discriminación y violencia de manera estructural. Sí, ahí va.
That's great. Thank you so much, Pia. And some of you may have noticed I suddenly had technical difficulties and I was kicked out of the meeting, but I was able to get back in. So here I am. And thank you for that, particularly enunciating for us, telling us exactly some of the elements of a community that demanded a place at the table on policy engagement, and a government, a client government of the bank, a government that made space for that engagement. And that's really what we're seeing in terms of the results of that. And that's terrific. So thank you, Pia, again. Rachel, as the social inclusion coordinator for BIC, you work on multiple dimensions of exclusion, not just SOGI exclusion. If you could tell us a bit about the parallels you see between the challenges LGBTI people face and those of other vulnerable populations. And more importantly, if you could say something about the lessons that can be learned that could help strengthen SOGI inclusion.
Thanks, Cliff. And I see a lot of parallels between disability inclusion and SOGI inclusion. When I first started working on disability inclusion at the bank about 9 years ago, when we talked about disability, we had to make the case for why. Why is it important to include persons with disabilities in bank projects and policies? Luckily, we are no longer having to make the case for why and have moved on to how. How do you design and implement projects that include the needs of persons with disabilities? On SOGI inclusion, unfortunately, I feel like we are still needing to make the case for why this matters and is fundamental to the success of development projects. I want us to move forward on the how question when it comes to SOGI inclusion. How do you design and implement projects that are non-discriminatory and adequately address the needs of LGBTQI individuals so that they have access to project benefits? I think a lot of this starts with education, having conversations with project teams at the bank, having conversations with ministry officials in implementing agencies on why and how to do this, and who can serve as resources throughout the process. Because honestly, these are newer issues to the bank and the government, and the capacity is just not there yet. Most importantly, there needs to be a safe connection to LGBTQI organizations in country who can identify challenges, barriers, and mitigation measures to ensuring access to project benefit. This also brings me to the importance of stakeholder engagement and engaging with SOGI groups and LGBTQI individuals because they know their situation best and can help to design projects that include and benefit them, as Amani was referencing earlier. I really cannot stress this enough as the cornerstone of how to get inclusion right. I want to talk about an education project we did some work on several years ago in Peru. I choose this example first and foremost because at the time, and I still think this is true to some degree, education and health projects do not often get the scrutiny they deserve because the general feeling is that a health or an education project can't cause the type of harm that potentially a large infrastructure project can. I disagree when you were talking about children with disabilities missing out on an education because the school system is not inclusive or accessible, or that schools are not a safe space for trans people, and therefore they don't go and miss out on their education. In this particular case in Peru, we saw that a significant portion of children with disabilities were left out of the education system or were in the system but were not learning because there were no accommodations made for them. On the other hand, because there is a specific bank policy on Indigenous peoples that must be complied with, Indigenous children and youth were provided accommodations to help them stay in school and encourage family participation in the school system. When doing advocacy on the issue of harm to children with disabilities by not being adequately included in the project, we heard that this is the way the education system was designed in Peru, and that the bank project was not causing harm, but just perpetuating the status quo. The education system and the bank project funding that system was not taking into consideration the needs of all marginalized groups in this case, and what measures needed to be put in place to make sure that all potential learners could access and be supported in the education system. I use this example not because I am trying to pit two groups against each other, but because I want to highlight the importance of specific references to groups in project documents, in this case, Indigenous children and youth, and the importance of policy and how it can change the whole way we look at projects by thinking through specific accommodations or provisions for some groups and not others, and how we really need to be able to move toward a more inclusive approach. I will say that now that the bank has its new environmental and social framework, I hope we won't be seeing these types of examples anymore because disability and SOGI are included. Ultimately, the bank, governments, civil society, and local LGBTQI stakeholders need to think about the how. How do policies already support this road to inclusion? And how can projects specifically address barriers or fundamental ways in which systems, like a health system or an education system, do not allow for the full participation of all in society, like LGBTQI individuals? This then needs to be addressed in project design and implementation. Thanks.
Thank you, Rachel. That's a pretty comprehensive answer to a first general question. Very useful. Thank you. And I actually we have a follow-up round of questions right now for the panelists before we go to the Q&A from the audience. And in fact, that first follow-up question is directed to you again, Rachel. So you gave us a very good sort of vision of what that could look like and what still needs to be done in terms of ensuring this is brought to the table with clients and and the capacity that needs to be built there for clients. But can you tell us what you see as the opportunities in a little more detail for addressing SOGI inclusion in programs and projects?
Thanks, Cliff. And unsurprisingly, I do have quite a few thoughts on that. I think the first is that we need to recognize the importance of the bank's environmental and social framework I referenced before, because there is a specific commitment to inclusion and non-discrimination where SOGI is specifically referenced. This means that the specific disaggregated impacts of projects on LGBTQI individuals must be addressed, and that stakeholder engagement is required throughout the project lifecycle, from design until implementation. The first opportunity I see is really to make sure that SOGI is referenced in project documents, because we know that unless specific groups are mentioned, they will most likely be overlooked and potentially unable to access project benefits. And even more important is having specific references to SOGI in binding legal documents that then becomes a legal obligation for the implementing agency and a way in which the bank can hold the government accountable through its supervision role. So how can this happen? There are really three ways. The bank project team raises it with the government raises it to the bank as a priority issue to include in the project, or it comes out through stakeholder engagement. Fundamentally, this is an issue that should be raised in every project, and ideally it would be raised through all three avenues to make sure it is adequately addressed and appropriately funded. But I want to stress the importance of bank project teams and implementing agencies raising this and writing in non-discrimination measures or specific provisions that break down barriers to LGBTQI individuals accessing project benefit. And again, that those measures are adequately funded. I want to dive a bit deeper on the stakeholder engagement piece because this is absolutely paramount to making sure that projects are inclusive and take into consideration the needs of LGBTQI individuals. Bank staff and government staff need to recognize that in some countries, LGBTQI groups are marginalized and discriminated against. So it would be potentially difficult and unsafe for them to raise issues in a public forum. In these cases, there must be specific SOGI consultation to ensure non-discrimination in project design and implementation. And I want to give an example on how engaging with civil society can improve project design. We have been working with 2 LGBTQI organizations in El Salvador to look at the initial bank-funded COVID-19 health response project. These 2 organizations initially had trouble engaging with the government of El Salvador, but they began engaging with the bank on their concerns around the project. The bank engagement opened up space for these organizations to engage with the government, resulting in the government holding a meeting with these groups for them to be able to raise their concerns. This most likely would not have happened without the bank using its leverage in this case. And I should say that the original COVID response project did not reference LGBTQI individuals at all. The engagement on the original COVID health response project had a ripple effect, impacting the vaccine project as well. The stakeholder engagement plan for the vaccine project, the roadmap for consultations on the project, mentions the need for disaggregated data that explicitly shows the impact of the project on LGBTQI individuals. This sets up the project to be more inclusive and hopefully will allow LGBTQI individuals to more easily access vaccines and information around vaccines. But I do have to mention one example of where the government and the bank still need to go further in El Salvador, and that is the prioritization of people with chronic diseases to get vaccinated, but the fact that HIV was not specifically referenced as a chronic disease in the government list provided, and that needs to be addressed. Finally, I want to emphasize that having specific references to SOGI and robust and meaningful stakeholder engagement throughout the project's life cycle is still not enough because unfortunately, things can fall apart in implementation. The bank and the government, where safe, need connections to SOGI groups in country that can raise alarm bells when implementation is not inclusive and that can hold both the government and the bank accountable for inclusive project design and implementation. Thanks, Cliff. I hope that gives you a little bit of information on what we're thinking. Thanks.
Terrific. And you saw me scribbling lots of notes from what you were saying. So very, very helpful. Thank you, Rachel. I want to now turn to Pia. Pia, what do you see as the you described before of much improved legal policy and program environment when it comes to LGBTI people in Argentina and their inclusion. So what do you see as the remaining obstacles for LGBTI inclusion in Argentina, especially in light of the COVID-19 pandemic and its impacts?
Muchísimas gracias. Bueno, ahí para iniciar este segundo bloque diré que por más que exista en Argentina un marco legal de protección al colectivo LGBT y algunas normativas de avance por esa inclusión de personas travestis y trans, aún, ¿no?, persisten situaciones de discriminación y violencia que tienen que ver justamente con las estructuras de nuestra sociedad en donde están afincadas estas prácticas terribles que hay que modificar. En ese sentido, con la pandemia nos encontramos con un contexto tremendo, terrible, porque lo que quedó evidenciado con la pandemia es la desigualdad estructural y la violencia en la que padecen a diario las personas LGBT. En ese sentido, el Estado argentino se encontró con un desafío enorme. Ese desafío enorme tiene que ver con poner las instituciones y las políticas públicas de cara al colectivo LGBT, a encontrar respuestas urgentes. Y esas respuestas urgentes tenían que ver con los suministros de alimentos, cómo las organizaciones LGBT en Argentina armaron redes. Estas redes eran redes solidarias, eran redes que permitían justamente armar en la República Argentina instituciones, organizaciones del gobierno y ONG para llegar con suministros médicos, con suministro alimentario, habilitar programas sociales que habían estado cerrados o que eran solamente destinatarios de esas políticas personas heterosexuales, para que se habilite y se abran esos programas sociales para personas travestis y trans, donde entendemos que han sido no solamente las más desprotegidas con la pandemia, sino que evidenciaron también problemas estructurales que hace nuestra población, como por ejemplo el tema de la vivienda. Habían desalojos tremendos y terribles en la ciudad de Buenos Aires que se debían justamente a contextos en donde nos ponían a trabajar las políticas públicas en pos no solamente de subsidios para el tema de viviendas, sino poner el eje en la discusión. ¿Qué pasa? Que las personas trans no tenemos acceso a una casa propia. Entonces, ese replanteo de políticas aparece en un contexto muy difícil como es el contexto de pandemia, donde se evidencia y se entrecruzan problemáticas estructurales que hace nuestra población. La pobreza, la migración, muchas compañeras travestis y trans de otros lugares, inmigradas, pero también con un problema de exclusión de los propios pueblos, ¿no? Hay una expulsión de nuestras identidades de aquellos lugares. Entonces ahí nos encontró con un enorme desafío para poder trabajar esto en políticas de diversidad a partir de una pandemia. Implicó un abordaje federal, territorial, impulsamos políticas que contribuyen a la inclusión LGBT, garantizamos los derechos de igualdad trato, coordinamos y apoyamos el fortalecimiento de políticas de acceso a la salud y al trabajo. Acá particularmente me voy a detener. Ustedes saben que en este contexto tan difícil como es el contexto pandémico, hemos trabajado en el Estado con un decreto que tiene que ver con el cupo laboral travesti trans en el sector público nacional, y allí pudimos trabajar con un piso de un 1% en la totalidad de los cargos y contratos para personas travesti, transexuales y transgénero. Esta política resulta de central importancia y es el resultado de la decisión política del presidente de la Nación, Alberto Fernández, para promover el ingreso de personas travestis y trans. Es necesario mencionar que actualmente la Cámara de Diputados de la Nación está pendiente del tratamiento de la Ley Nacional de Cupo e Inclusión Laboral Travesti y Trans. Para esta política pública se trabajó de manera articulada, porque no es solamente el acceso al empleo. ¿A dónde acceden al empleo? A las estructuras de un Estado que son estructuras heterosexuales, cis, excluyente, donde necesitamos transformar. Entonces este proceso implica un desafío enorme en la política de cupo laboral, porque implica transversalizar la perspectiva travesti trans a todas esas esferas y que nuestras compañeras permanezcan en esos lugares de trabajo, y para permanecer en esos lugares de trabajo hay que trabajar muchas veces con la modificación de las prácticas de violencia y discriminación hacia adentro de esos espacios laborales. Eso pone un desafío no solo a un ministerio, sino pensar esta política pública de manera articulada e interseccional, ¿no? Es importante la mirada interseccional. Este decreto contempla la terminalidad educativa de aquellas compañeras, travestis y trans que no hayan terminado sus estudios primarios o secundarios, conecta con una unidad coordinadora interministerial, donde está el Ministerio de Mujeres, está el Ministerio de Educación, está el INADI, el Instituto Nacional contra la Discriminación, la Xenofobia y el Racismo, esté también presente allí, invitada en los sindicatos, los gremios, el Ministerio de Trabajo, la Secretaría de Gestión y Empleo Público, dependiente de la jefatura de gabinete. Bueno, ahí para terminar en esta parte, agradecerles y decirles que puedo relatar y contar un poco más, sinteticé a modo de ejemplo, pero lo que evidenció esta pandemia justamente nos pone a trabajar y a redoblar el esfuerzo a un gobierno de cara al colectivo LGBT y teniendo presente en la agenda pública la gran desigualdad que existe aún en nuestra población.
Cliff, you're muted, Cliff.
Cliff, you're on mute. Sorry. Thank you, Pia. It's very good what you laid out for us and reminding us that poverty is already too prevalent in our community, including in Argentina. And what COVID has revealed when we're talking about concentrated poverty in the community, when we're talking about concentrated social exclusion in the community. Really good to hear about how you, and therefore how the Argentine government, is thinking about the need, what needs to happen to address this. So I want to come back over to you, Amani. You were telling us earlier about what the challenges are in Jamaica, and also what you focused on in terms of trying to move and addressing some of those challenges. Maybe if you could, if you were speaking to a young trans person today, a young trans woman, let's say, in Jamaica today, just coming up, what kind of advice would you provide her about what she'll be facing and what she can do? How could you energize her to change the world?
Hold on there.
Hello, yes. Thank you, Clifton, for that question. Can you repeat the question for me, please?
Absolutely. I was noting how you outlined what you faced growing up and becoming a young woman in Jamaica, becoming an activist in Jamaica. If you had a young trans woman today as a mentee, what would you say to her about the future and what she can do?
The truth, first I would start with the truth. Our visibility is our power. Our existence, it is our power. I would also say to that young individual that I want us to see each and every day that we survive is a next step out of oppression, because they are creating, because the society, I believe that society in general, it creates, we are creation. I think that we are creation of what society stop us from being. We will never be erased from society. So that is what I would tell a young trans person that is coming up, and also tell them the truth, that we are not treated with respect, we're not treated with love, we're not treated with dignity, we're not treated fairly when it comes down to anything at all that we want to either learn or to be a part of, and to believe in yourself and to have a voice, you know, and to speak up, you know, and don't be afraid to have your voice or to have your art. to be put out there in the universe or to have it being shown, because someone is always looking and someone is always, and so the support is here, and things will be less, you know, things will be easier for them. And what I also wanted to talk about to Mr. Clifton, I wanted to mention, and I wanted to talk about, because United Trans Creative, I believe that young trans persons also need education. It's very important. But the truth is, like myself, I'm not educated enough. I'm educated enough because I'm a Black trans woman. I'm not going to say that about myself, but I leave school from an early age, and I've learned a lot of stuff by self-taught, you know, so I want my young trans sisters and brothers to believe in their self. Don't be afraid, have the passion, do whatever you're supposed to do just to have your work put out there, you know. And I also want us to, United Trans Creative is an organization that was founded with me and my sister, not by myself. And it's an organization where we want to give the younger generation that is up and coming the chance and the opportunity and for the light to be shined on us, because we're so much more than, you know. We want the chance and the opportunity so that we can become leaders in society. We want the chance and the opportunity where we can, because United Trans Creative, it needs to be structured properly. We need to give the opportunity to others out there, because our work, it have been underlooked and it have been overvalued. But we're doing the work and we're changing that. The movement, we're doing it in fashion, in style, in activism. We're breaking these barriers, and these barriers must be broke. I cannot do it alone. The trans community cannot do it alone, but we are doing it, and we are going to continue doing it. But what I also want is, for me and my team, we're doing this and we're going to do it together, because I believe in giving also trans people the opportunity, because most of us do not have the education. Most of us, we're at a stage in our life, we're at a certain age where we're not even, we don't want to go back to school, because that's how I felt one time. But we are very creative. When we come together, we're very, very, very creative. And that's why I've always said, and I will continue saying, that our presence is our resilience. So I believe in giving them the opportunity. Create some form of sustainable, I think in creating some form of sustainable program where you can take these trans women and trans men from off the street, put them in the program, who can do hairstyle or do the hairstyle, who can do nails, because one of the things is for us to stop from being killed is to get some form of organization, something, build something for us where you can get them off the street, because when we were turned away from our home, just as how I was turned away from my home, when we were turned out by our family, we turned toward friends. But even, and it is so funny, because sometimes at the same time, our own community, they discriminate us, and they do not appreciate, you know, us, and they always feel that we're supposed to be at the last. So I want my team and my sister and my trans brother, I want us to continue and do the work that we're doing, get these sustainable projects put in place for these young trans youths that are up in, as I said before, and I will say again, so we can get them off the street, and so that they're able to work for themselves, to fend for themselves, so that they can become leaders in society, and so that they can receive the respect and the love that we need to receive in society and in the universe in general. I'm very angry and I'm very upset, you know, in terms of how the government is handling and treating us here. And as I said, so much more can be done. They can do so much more. They need to do so much more. And I am not going to stop. And at times I feel like I want to stop, because it feels like, what am I doing? That makes no sense, but it does make sense. And I will never stop, and I will never stop fighting. I will never stop doing what I can do and doing my part to make sure that my sisters, my trans sisters and trans brothers, they are being treated with respect and with dignity and with love.
Thank you. Thank you, Emma.
No matter where I go or no matter where I end up in this world, I will support them. I will be here for them. I will continue continue on the fight. And my true passion is being a creative, a stylist, and I will continue on to put out and send out that message in my work. And I'm bold, and I want to put out work out there because I need these topics to be talked about. The government, what are they doing here? What are they doing?
Understood. Thank you, Imani. The truth and visibility, and I think on issues like this, it's okay to be angry as well. And it's clear that you're somebody who's channeling that anger into making change in your society. And that's really, really critical. So we're now going to turn to some questions from the audience. And I've got a couple that have been sent to me here. And this one, first of all, I was asked to define the acronyms we're using because some in our large audience might not actually be totally familiar with some of the language we're speaking. I should have thought about that from the very beginning. So let me just flag for folks. You've heard us say SOGI, the English acronym, which is about the set of issues. It's about sexual orientation and gender identity. And in fact, the way the bank approaches it, it's inclusive of gender expression as well as issues specific to intersex people, sex characteristics. So in the field, we often refer to those issues as SOGI ESC, so SOGI SC. When we talk about people, you've heard us talk a lot about LGBTI. And again, in English, that's the acronym we use for how many people self-identify, or as how others identify our community. The L being lesbian women, G being gay men, B being bisexual people. That's about sexual orientation, right? And then we have the T, which represents trans women, trans men, other gender diverse people. And that's really about, gender identity. That's not about sexual orientation. And then finally, that I is not about either one of those things. It's about intersex people and the specific challenges they face in terms of being intersex people. So with that, I want to turn to another question, a question that came in from the audience. This is to you, Pia. And an audience member raised the issue and the importance of the safety, physical and mental safety of LGBTI people, including in Argentina. And they had a specific question within that safety question. And I'm going to ask both, after you answer, I'm going to ask both Imani and Rachel to maybe say something about that safety issue in terms of their own work. But they asked specific to you, Pia, how does the Argentinian government try to assure the safety of trans people in prisons? So too many trans people, particularly trans women, find themselves in prisons. And the question is, how does the government try to address their safety in those kinds of situations?
Bueno, es un desafío muy grande para el gobierno frente a que todos los instrumentos del servicio penitenciario son instrumentos binarios. Entonces aparecía la cárcel de varones y la cárcel de mujeres. Y hace unos años el reclamo del movimiento travesti trans en Argentina permitía a que muestre justamente una realidad, y esa realidad era que muchas de nuestras compañeras estaban privadas de su libertad frente a situaciones de una criminalización, ¿no?, por nuestra propia identidad. Y comenzaron a aparecer allí en los relevamientos. Este año aparece en el relevamiento público y oficial de la Procuración Penitenciaria de la Nación, en sus fuentes, las identidades travestis y trans. Y ahí trae consigo temas a abordar, ¿no? Esos temas a abordar tienen que ver con el entrecruzamiento de una población en vulnerabilidad, en situación de pobreza, en situación teniendo migraciones, sin acceso a las políticas sociales del Estado. Entonces ahí nos hemos puesto a trabajar justamente con otras instituciones para poder llegar a estas compañeras que están privadas de su libertad, y también hay un posicionamiento allí frente a la justicia. Las compañeras que están privadas de su libertad están reclamando a una justicia patriarcal, aún nos encontramos con enormes desafíos en Argentina que tiene que ver con esta transversalización del género y la diversidad en todas sus instituciones y modificar los patrones heterosis patriarcales que existen va a llevar un tiempo. Sin lugar a duda es desafío de este gobierno, pero también de los próximos gobiernos. Sabemos que modificar la realidad de nuestra población implica un trabajo serio y comprometido en las políticas públicas teniendo en cuenta estas realidades. Hoy nos encontramos en Argentina, las organizaciones LGBT, en conjunto con muchas instituciones de nuestro Estado, en una búsqueda importante de un compañero trans como Well, ¿no? Que hace 2 meses salió a buscar un trabajo precario y en esas condiciones desapareció. Y esto no lo puedo dejar de decir. Reconozco las políticas públicas de nuestro Estado y el gran desafío que tenemos, pero a la vez también sabemos que debe haber un compromiso importantísimo de un poder como es el Poder Judicial frente a nuestras propias trayectorias travestis y trans, frente a nuestras causas y cómo son leídas adentro de esa justicia patriarcal. Necesitamos una reforma y esa reforma debe ser transfeminista. Loana Berkin ya lo decía, ¿no? Loana Berkin fue una de las compañeras activistas a nivel internacional, de la cual nosotras, las otras travestis, hemos aprendido bastante y que tiene que ver justamente con esta transformación social. Esa transformación social da lugar a que todas nuestras compañeras travestis y trans dejemos de estar en los márgenes de la ciudadanía y comencemos a acceder a esos derechos. Hoy es agenda de esta política pública en este gobierno, pero sabemos que debe ser ejemplar en la región y a cada jurisdicción. Los desafíos son enormes y ahí nos encontramos trabajando. Quien les habla es una travesti trans de un pueblo originario, afrodescendiente del norte de Argentina, y hoy me encuentro poniendo sobre la agenda también nuestras realidades que tienen que ver con las identidades travestis y trans en pueblos originarios, en afrodescendencia en Argentina, y ahí en ese enorme desafío de leer la política pública, no solo con perspectiva de género y diversidad sexual, sino de manera transversal e interseccional.
Very good. Let me just remind the audience that if you have specific questions, do put them in the chat. Somebody is feeding those to me so that we can make sure we ask our panelists the questions you have in your mind. But in the meantime, I would like to turn to Rachel and then to Imani and ask you to give us some reflection on this issue of safety and security of the community, including in project work that the bank supports. And as we all know, I want to make sure everybody in the audience understands the context for that question from the audience member is that we know from data, because we all know data is a big problem. We don't have enough LGBTI or SOGI SC specific data. And we want to generate more to help governments understand what the contours of the problem, the challenge are, and what they need to do to address that. So while we're trying to ensure that, one place we do have a lot of data, mostly generated by NGOs, like some of yours, is, and in some cases, some governments, like Argentina, is we have data on violence. And we know that there's extraordinarily high violence affecting LGBTI people. That's SOGI SC based or targeted at LGBTIQ people. So that's the context for this question from the audience member about safety. So Rachel Burton, if you could give us any reflections on that in terms of BIC's own engagements with your partners.
Thanks, Cliff. And I want to turn back to stakeholder engagement and consultations and the importance of safety in that. And I want to build off of Amani, what you said when you said that our visibility is our power. That really struck me. And I think that that is an incredibly powerful statement, because that is the reason we are pushing for including LGBTQI individuals in consultations. But the fundamental issue here is safety and security. And that needs to be addressed and made sure that we are thinking about what that actually looks like. And so in a particular country, if it needs to happen in a separate consultation to allow LGBTQI individuals to A, feel safe, and to B, feel comfortable raising some of these issues, then that is what absolutely needs to happen. And if that cannot happen in a safe way through the government, then that responsibility has to fall to the bank. in which the bank would take the responsibility for making sure that those consultations are safe. Because the last thing that needs to happen is somebody raising their voice during a consultation and then there being retaliation as a result of that, because that unfortunately just continues to perpetuate the cycle. So I think that I just want to highlight that stakeholder engagement piece, and also thinking through, as I mentioned before in that Peru example, is that we have to think about systems. And what do systems look like, and how can we build safe systems? So one of the things we continue to hear around schools is that people don't go to school because they don't feel safe on the way to school, or that schools are unsafe, the physical buildings of school are unsafe. And so I think we need to think about this more holistically when we think about different systems and different projects. And one of those ways we can do that is through stakeholder engagement and through having those conversations with people who have been impacted and will be impacted by these projects, and thinking through what measures need to be taken into consideration to make these projects inclusive. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Rachel. And I'm going to ask you, Amani, to reflect also on the safety issue when it comes to your community, our community, in engagement with government and the broader society.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this question. 2 minutes. Can you repeat? Can you repeat?
Absolutely, absolutely. And what we're focused on here is this issue of the high levels of violence that are targeted at our community, at LGBTIQ people, and what are therefore the relevant issues that our community champions, people like you, are taking into account when it comes to safety of these members, when we're getting them to engage with the government or engage with other broader civil society.
Thank you. That question. What I would want and what I would love to see is to promote safety amongst entrepreneur and space owners of social spaces, to be welcoming and inviting to LGBTQI people and trans people and non-binary people in general, for folks to access services. Like when you go to places like, you have this place that we normally go to, Chilitos, you know, and also you have other places that are around. This is what I would want, and this is what I would want for the government to act on in society. Train securities. They also need to train their securities around protection. I think that is also very important, of marginalized folks in public spaces. So that is what I need to see happen. And that is what our team will be working on for it to happen here in Jamaica, and I think also in the world in general. Put trans people and non-binary people at the front. They need to stop putting us at the back, and they need to also stop using us and abusing us. I also want Jamaican trans and non-binary creatives to also know where they're putting their gifts into, because a lot of time they're using us and they're abusing us, and they're not paying us fairly for our art and our talent that we have. And we have so much more to offer if only the world give us the chance to listen to us, understand us. What a beautiful world and what a beautiful society this place would be. That is what I want, and that is what I'm working towards.
Thank you, Amani. And you remind us in your comments there that it's not just about the services, which is a lot of what I was talking about at the beginning, but it's also safety and access to markets and safety and access to spaces. So that's a good reminder for us. So thank you.
And it's to all public spaces. Let me tell you something, Mr. Clifton. As a creative and an activist or advocate, we use our art when we're going through our pain and through our trauma. You see, yeah, that is all that I have to say, Mr. Clifton.
Sure, I understand. Thank you. Pia, I have another question that's directed from an audience member to you, and they're asking you to tell us a bit more about these inclusive health policies and practices that you made mention of.
Bueno, antes de desarrollar esa pregunta, abrazar a Emani, porque comparto completamente lo que ella manifiesta y es lo que manifestamos muchas compañeras también, ¿no? Hay allí algo para repensar, no solo en términos de servicio, en términos de protección de derechos, sino qué pasa con toda la trama de nuestras vidas, con nuestros afectos, con nuestro modo de habitar el espacio público. Y en ese sentido, en Argentina, con la Ley de Identidad de Género en el año 2012, el artículo 11 contempla la salud integral para las personas trans. Esto quiere decir tanto en tratamientos hormonales como en intervenciones quirúrgicas. Tuvo una reglamentación posterior a ese año 2012 y al día de hoy nos encontramos con un enorme desafío a que existan los suministros en cada una de las provincias, en los hospitales centrales. Esto se volvió a activar. Debemos recordar que Argentina pasó por un cambio de gobierno. Ese cambio de gobierno había retrocedido en derechos LGBTIQ+. En ese sentido, actualmente se puso en marcha que los suministros de tratamientos hormonales para las personas travestis y trans lleguen a los servicios de salud en cada uno de los espacios de nuestros territorios y se pueda trabajar de manera conjunta ahí las instituciones de la salud, no solo en términos de VIH, en términos de la prevención para los tratamientos hormonales también, sino hablar de las construcciones identitarias lejos y por fuera de lo que son los propios estereotipos de género, ¿no? Esos propios estereotipos que también están presentes y que constituyen nuestras realidades travestis y trans. Hay ahí un gran desafío con el tema de las intervenciones quirúrgicas. Se avanzó con operaciones dentro de los espacios públicos en hospitales en Argentina, pero aún hoy existen listas de espera, ¿no? Y actualmente nos encontramos con la pandemia y atendiendo una situación de emergencia sanitaria en donde el primer punto de relieve tiene que ver con el desarrollo de las medidas y estrategias por lo de COVID. Entonces ahí se viene trabajando desde la Coordinación de Promoción de Salud justamente para poder llegar y tejer redes de activistas también con las organizaciones para ver el reclamo a que se cumpla el derecho a la salud integral de las personas travestis y trans, entendiendo que no se trata solamente de tratamientos hormonales o intervenciones quirúrgicas, sino en esa gran integralidad que hace a nuestros afectos, a nuestra vida, a nuestro desarrollo y a nuestro proceso de construcción de identidades travestis y trans, y también de un colectivo LGBT, hoy de identidades no binarias.
Thank you very much, Pia. I see another question that's come to me, and this is from somebody we know well in Belize, and he's asking a two-part question. Why aren't there more trans people working at the bank? And I will note that, in fact, we do have a handful of self-identified trans people who are bank staff in various parts of the bank and some of the country offices. And in fact, we have our human resources vice presidency has kicked off in the last 18 months, 2 years, a campaign asking all staff to self-identify in the HR system by their sexual orientation and also by their gender identity. And so that's a new initiative to try to get a handle on what we look like as the bank when it comes to who we are as staff. And in fact, we already have people who have self-identified as trans within that. In addition to that, we've been working hard with HRVP. This is not what I do, but certainly Globe, our staff association, it's what they're focused on, is bank staff. And what they've worked hard with HRVP to change language on what goes out from HRVP in terms of employment opportunities and contracting, to ensure that we're using language that makes it clear that we're welcoming of all applicants across the board in terms of genders, in terms of gender identity, in terms of sexual orientation. So we probably still have a ways to go on that, but it's something we're absolutely trying to move as well. Now, the second part of that question was, what is the World Bank action beyond high-profile events like this from DC? And I would just, there's a lot more that we could talk about on this, but I'll quickly give a short overview. And it's just to say that we have identified for ourselves an important leadership role to play on data generation. And we've been engaged in that with clients who are willing. And I know, for instance, that question came from a Caribbean colleague. We do not yet, unfortunately, have lots of Caribbean clients, the governments, who are willing to engage on that agenda. So we hope that we can move that agenda at some point, and we're going to have some discussions on that soon. But we're already doing that in other places where the clients are asking for that kind of bank support. And we've also, within that, just kicked off what we hope will be numerous country studies on the economic cost of exclusion. Again, starting with countries where the clients are asking for that kind of research, to be able to add the economic cost to the picture of where we stand in terms of what's fair, what's right, what's equal, what is appropriate for human rights. We believe in all those things, but one thing the bank can add to that is the piece of the puzzle that is about the economic cost to individuals and to economies. And then the other thing that we're also heavily engaged on is building the capacity of our own staff on these issues to begin to apply that SOGI lens. ESF gives us a great, that was the environmental and social framework that Rachel talked a lot about. That gives us a great entry point for exactly that. And that has included building capacity of client counterparts, government counterparts, in different regions of the world, different countries. Again, that relies on a government willingness to engage in that. That's a quick overview to answer the one question, another question that came in from the audience members. And with that, I think what we're going to do is I'm going to give a quick roundup just to kind of try to tie some of this together, and then we're going to turn to the closing. I think some of the key themes that we've heard discussed here, raised by the panelists and also raised by questions from the audience, were clearly around discrimination, a really important theme. And we heard each of you specifically describe what some of that discrimination is. It's in discrimination in housing, it's discrimination in healthcare, it's discrimination in employment, as well as other areas of our lives and other areas of what governments provide in terms of their engagement, their services and otherwise. We heard about what a government that's committed itself to LGBTI inclusion looks like in terms of the kinds of policies and programs and laws that it's trying to move, and how that actually translates into engagement by LGBTI community in the public policy making apparatus of the government. That's really key, obviously, is when you have the government that far on board that our folks are at the table, our communities are at the table in that public policy making discussion. And we heard about how governments need to really focus on the COVID impact and how we can engage our communities that are really severely impacted in the responses. That if we're not engaged in the responses, we're going to be left out of the responses. And so we heard that each of you had something to say about what's going on in recent times. I want to end sort of the roundup just to a couple of specific comments that Imani made. The truth and visibility. She said she's going to always speak truth, and that means truth to power. It means to our own governments. It means to institutions like the World Bank. Speak truth to power and visibility, the power of visibility and the importance of visibility as a part of that engagement. So without further ado, since we're running out of time, I'm going to turn to our Global Director for the Environmental and Social Framework, Maninder Gill, who's going to give us some closing thoughts. So over to you, Maninder. And first of all, I just want to thank also from me, our panelists. Thank you for your time. Very valuable and very appreciated. Over to you, Maninder.
Thank you very much, Cliff. And thanks to the to the panel. It's really inspiring to listen to all of them and their perspectives and the work they have done and their contributions and their suggestions for going forward. As I was listening to them, I felt that I almost don't have much to add. I think what we could best do is to really reflect upon what they have said and what they have told us, and to carve an agenda for action based on what we heard today. Rather than me coming up with my own thoughts. So if we can allow our thoughts to be shaped by what we've heard today, I think we will serve the agenda well. So I had, listening to them, I also, like you, Cliff, had kind of two, three buckets or two, three pillars of my thinking, how I understood what I heard. So one is just how urgent, important, essential this agenda is. That was one. Two, the fact that institutions like the World Bank have committed to do a lot more and therefore need to do a lot more. And I think so we need to be held to account. We need to just be able to do, and we should do what we have said and promised we would do. So that's the second kind of bucket. The third was that by itself is not enough. We do need to see how we can influence beyond institutions like the World Bank and see what's happening in the countries and in society. So how can we shape what's happening outside of essentially the development project kind of context that we support? And then finally, I was thinking there was a number of suggestions about how to move this forward, the role that leadership plays and visibility plays and voice plays on how we take this forward. So I'll kind of divide up my thoughts into these four categories. I mean, it's so I think in terms of the importance of this, so we as an institution and all of us as individuals stand for inclusion, non-discrimination, gender equality, all types of equality. And this is one agenda where LGBTI people suffer extreme forms of discrimination. So if we are committed to those principles, then we do need to think of them and do something about addressing this severe form of discrimination. Two, related to that, as we were saying earlier, Cliff and I were at the World Bank Board of Directors. They had a BBL, a brown bag lunch on this topic just before we came here. And one of the things I mentioned there was that we can't be partially inclusive. We can't say we uphold the value of inclusion, but we need to exclude, two groups or one group, or here is a list of people I'm not fully sure about, but otherwise I'm all for inclusion. It's a binary thing. If we are inclusive, then we are inclusive of everyone. Inclusion by definition means being inclusive of someone who may be different from you, who lives somewhere else, has a different lifestyle, different values, maybe anything, or shared values of humanity, but beyond that, different preferences. So if we are about inclusion, then it is essential to address LGBTI exclusion. If not, then we are not inclusive. So it's kind of a binary thing. It's also unique, this form of discrimination, because this is where there is no safe haven, and Imani mentioned how she faced tremendous discrimination within the family, within the community, within of people around her. So it is unique, where unlike other excluded groups, where your own peers, your people belonging to your group or your family are always with you and for you. Even if you are a person with disability, there's a lot of sympathy you find in your school, among your friends, among your community. And so it's a test for all of us working on development. If we can move the needle on LGBTI inclusion, we can say we truly we walk the talk. There were a number of suggestions on how we can do that in the institution. Moving on to what the World Bank can do, I think we can get more informed, educated. There's a huge variation in how much all of us in the World Bank understand the issue. So it is important, those conversations that Rachel talked about, those are essential. And those need to be held without prejudice. It's perfectly fine for colleagues not to understand the agenda very well. And it's everyone's duty to inform, educate, and bring them along. So we need that. The immense importance of stakeholder engagement, and I think that's something within the bank and in society. Engaging people is a route to, is by itself inclusive, but then identifies paths and ways to what to do about a certain situation. And we have made a commitment to strong stakeholder engagement through our ESF. So we need to uphold that. And we are on our way, but we are not there yet. And we are working on how to make it truly a meaningful engagement process, which means it needs to be safe and secure. All voices need to be heard. We need to use it as an entry point to identify problems and issues, not go in with preconceived notions about problems definition, and then just consult people to get validation of what we think is the real problem, to be open even in terms of understanding what the challenge is. And it used to happen to us a lot when we were working on 20 years ago on Indigenous people's agenda. We felt that any education project is good for Indigenous peoples, regardless of the language of instruction or the pedagogical techniques involved. And we learned very quickly that that's not true. We need to ask them if this works for them. I think same goes for LGBTI inclusion. Let's not make any assumptions. It is very important to talk to LGBTI groups and within them the subgroups, because sometimes there is also uneven treatment of different groups within LGBTI groups. So let's be very acutely aware of that. I also found very powerful that focusing on the how, why is of course very important. Why is this important, and what needs to be done and how? I think breaking that down will really help move the needle, because sometimes when governments or World Bank colleagues want to do, they may not understand the how. They may not know how to do something. And when you don't know the how, you are more apprehensive. So just working on and focusing on the how opens doors, and it makes issues less controversial and less divisive by just everyone saying, oh, if this is what you're talking about, of course we can do that. If you're talking about making sure no one gets bullied in class, we can work on that. Or if you say, if it is providing essential life-saving drugs to gay men, of course, we don't want anyone to die. We are for that. So I think just breaking it down in ways that are specific and informed by proper engagement with LGBTI groups is a great way forward. And our ESF is an entry point. Rachel and Vic and other colleagues do a remarkable job of holding us accountable as an institution. And what they can do is to hold us even more accountable. And if they do so, in fact, they are helping us do our job better. So any criticism, any suggestions are actually helping us become better as professionals and helping us make stronger contributions to development. So let's make use of the ESF. We've in a way fought or we worked 20 years to get a comprehensive framework for environmental and social addressing environmental and social issues. So let's make the best use of that. Let's not underestimate the power of the ESF. So that's about development and the bank. But then also I was struck by how much needs to happen, how much more needs to happen. And the story from Argentina is a lot about laws, policies, advocacy, movements that help move the needle on a number of fronts within the country. So that was also very inspiring for me that, the desire and the advocacy then needs to be broken down into bits of homework, and we need to make sure that we are working on all of the bits in changing institutions, laws, policies, regulations, ways of doing business, practice related to different aspects. But then also what struck me with that is that one needs to go beyond. And even in the Argentina example, just the fact that you have some law, regulation, or policy doesn't mean that suddenly the society is becoming inclusive. So the power of winning mindsets, addressing mindsets and biases and unconscious biases, and therefore the need to win hearts and minds. So that's the real agenda, that you're not doing something because you have to, because there's a certain policy, but because you really believe in it and you want to do it. That also struck me as a big, and often we go in with our ESF and say, you have to do this because the XYZ. Can we make a bigger effort to also win the minds that, why this is important and shouldn't you care, and make that leap? And for that, again, there was a realization that for that's not a matter of just papers and research. It is, of course, all of that and conversations. If you're to win people's hearts and minds, the importance of music, arts, culture, and we often treat that as we are the World Bank, and that's kind of, those are not mainstream tools of development. But if you have to move someone and influence them, it's as powerful a tool. I may get much more influence by a poem or by a song or by a painting than I might by a paper written by someone. So if we agree we are in the business of influencing hearts and minds, then we do need to treat very credibly all of the instruments and tools that can help us shape minds and hearts. So that was another important takeaway for me. And finally, how we take this forward, I think the point about having more leaders and more people in the World Bank who are LGBTI, that's an important point. And to not only have more people, but then to have them lead as LGBTI people, not only influencing the SOGI agenda, but also taking everyone else along with them, to be leaders of everyone. And the importance of showcasing that this is not about one group helping themselves. This is about LGBTI friends making a difference in the world and helping all of us. So how we can nurture that leadership and how we can enable similar leadership out in societies, which is about, the points that Imani made, be visible, be vocal, engage and lead, how we make nurturing that leadership of LGBTI friends as a way to propel this agenda forward. So I learned a lot. Whatever I said in the last 10 minutes is everything that I picked up from all of you today in this discussion. And I'm really grateful for that. And I think it'll be great to come back, Anna, if we can come back next year and with, on May 17th, or if it's a weekend day, maybe, 16th or 18th, and take stock and see, and with others certainly, but certainly with the people we have today with us, to see how much we've been able to move the needle, not only outside, but also within ourselves, within our sphere of influence, within the things that we work on and which we have more ability to influence. How much have we moved the needle on that? Would be great to take stock within a year. But once again, big thanks to the panel and big thanks for giving me the opportunity to be here today.
Thank you, Maninder. Thank you finally to Pia, to Imani, to Rachel. Thank you to Anna and Maninder, of course, and thank you to all of you who listened in and sent in questions. We had a couple of questions that we didn't get to in the Q&A, but we will endeavor, as I said, to provide you an answer after this event. Thank you, everybody, and have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Hasta luego.